Fellow Ghanaians, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. It's Thursday, the 29th day of June in the year of our Lord, 2023. My name is Winston Amoah, and tonight our focus is on the Assin North by-elections. Well, not on who won and who didn't win, and not on the strategies going into the elections, but there's one thing that many of you have talked about post the election. Yes, you may have talked about the strategy. Yes, you may have asked questions and said, well, is this a sign of things to come? Is this the much needed referendum on the performance of the government? Mind you, former President John Dramani Mahama on Sunday said, well, this was going to be a referendum on this government. You've had pollsters disagreeing. And talking about pollsters, it looked like it was going to be the NPP's Charles Opoku winning the Assin North by-election. For some, it was very close. But he was in the lead, at least, with 1.1% by Sunday. How come, and that's according to the Global Info Analytics, how come by Tuesday he had lost by some 13% margin? How did it happen that this same man who was supposed to be in the lead in what was expected to be a close contest ended up losing badly? But he's not that, the Global Analytics are not the only people who predicted it. He was going to win. You had pollster Ben Efson also predicting a win for the NPP's Charles Opoku. This evening, we want to interrogate that. We ask ourselves very simple questions. Why did the polls get it wrong? What did they not do right, or what did they do wrong? When we return after this break, I'll be introducing my guest to you, and then we'll get into the conversation about why the polls got it wrong. How did they even come by the analysis that they came by? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us on Upfront on the Joy News channel with me, Winston Amoah. And joining us via Zoom tonight, we have Professor Kobe Mensah, who is a political marketing expert. He teaches at the University of Ghana Business School at the University of Ghana. And also Musa Dankwa. Now, Musa Dankwa is head of global research of the Global Info Analytics. Many of you have asked questions because they actually came out and said, well, it was a very close race, and that, Charles Opoku was leading by 1.1%. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Winston. Thanks for
Great. So let me start off with you, Musa Dankwa, because you conducted that poll, and I know that by now there's been lots of questions here, but I just want to understand. So, yes, I see in your document that when you conducted the poll earlier, Charles Opoku was leading convincingly, but by the last time you did the poll, it was 1.1%. However, on the day of the election, 13% gap. How come that you said it was 1.1%, an indication of a close contest, and it never happened?
Right. Thank you very much for having me. If you look at the results that came through, we were about 3% off the mark, if you do the mathematics. Now, no pollster can allocate people who said, I'm undecided to any particular candidate. And remember, in the poll, 6.9% of voters said they were undecided. So you couldn't give it to any candidate. But on the headline poll, Charles was leading 1.1%. But we showed that the race was looking very kind of downward spiral for Charles, from what we have known in the figures from week number 6 June. He has been on downward trend every week, averaging a loss of 1% every day. And he was the only candidate who was slipping while James Detikwesi was rising. And then you have people who said they were undecided also increasing. What happened? Now, there are a number of theories we are proposing right now. One is that people who said they were going to vote for Charles Opoku, in fact, didn't vote for him in the end. We've just been looking at some of the polling numbers and the actual results. For example, in the polls, we're expecting Charles to win. He was leading in Praso. He lost. He was leading in Breku. He lost. In fact, in MPP stronghold of Enjwa, he was supposed to be leading, but he lost. So you could see that the views of voters in the MPP stronghold was actually the opposite of what they did on election day, which made us believe that they were a bit economical with the truth. They didn't want to vote for him, but they didn't disclose that to us on election day. And also, in the areas where MPP was strong in the poll, there were a high number of voters who were undecided. And on election day, they didn't come out for Charles. They went in for Jim Detikwesi.
Hold on a minute, and let's delve into details here. I'll get to Professor Kobi-Mensah shortly. First, you're suggesting that the people that you spoke to did not tell you the truth?
Absolutely, and we made that clear in the report before even the election.
How do you come by that conclusion?
Good. We asked them a question. In the first week that we went there, we asked them, if you were offered an inducement to vote for a candidate, what steps would you take? What action would you take as a voter? One is to take the money and vote for the candidate. Two, take the money, vote against the candidate. Or don't take the money and vote against the candidate. Don't take the money and vote for the candidate. In the first polling that we did, the baseline poll, those who said they would take the money and vote for that candidate was 31%.
Okay.
And those who said they would take the money and vote against them was 44%. Let's focus on these two groups. That's critical. In the last poll that we did, those who said they would take the money and vote has shot up to 78%. And those who said they would take the money and not vote for that candidate was only 16%. You see, context is very important. During that time, money was flooding the constituency. People were receiving the money. So if you tell me that, oh, I will take and not vote for you, it's unlikely you will give me the money if I had something to give away.
Okay.
So they were telling us that response so they can get the money.
Now, before I get to, this is my final question before I get to Professor Kobi-Mensah. First of all, when you're conducting a research, you look at the validity and reliability of it. You look at how you're measuring and say, is this the right way to measure? And also find out whether if we're to go back to these same people, you get the same response. That's actually the main issue there. I'll get to Professor Mensah on that shortly. But how did you measure? How did you come by the people themselves? And what sort of questions were you asking them?
Right, okay. We had a series of questions that we started with. And over time, we put them down to what we think was critical for the election.
Okay.
So you could see that we had issue about the inducement always being asked. We had an issue of whether the government's effort in building roads in other areas will have influence on them. We also had a question about the education's legal case, whether they think it's an issue for them that would let them vote for him or vote against him. And then we also zoom in to ask them whether they were voting for Charles because of who he was or because of MPP, where we were of the view that he was popular initially because of who he is and not because of the MPP brand. We want to get these answers clearly from the voters. Now, so these were the questions that we asked them to enable us to really understand what they would do in the end.
Okay.
And when it comes to the question, about 47% of them were saying that they were voting for Charles because they feared that if they vote for Detikwesi, he could end up in jail. Almost half of his supporters or voters. And then we had 20% of his voters saying that they were voting for him purely because of who he is, and not the party. So we're trying to see whether he is the one that is attracting the votes or the party's performance that is attracting the vote. And we realized that it was his personality that was doing the trick. But there was critical point in the campaign when he was interacting with the voters, engaging them one-on-one, was high in the poll. When the campaign was hijacked by national headquarters, he began to slip.
Hold on a minute on that. We'll get back to that. But let me get to you, Professor Mensah. So we had a conversation this morning, and I mean, it's based on the feedback we've actually brought this conversation back. You've listened to, Musa Dankwa make the point. He indicates that he spoke to these people, but he believes that the people lied to him. You're a researcher. I mean, what's your response to that?
Thank you, Winston, for having me, and hello, Musa. I partly, sort of agree with Musa's position, although we couldn't actually say that the people actually lied, because, and of course, I like the word he used, that they were economically, what do you call?
Economical with the truth.
With the truth, yeah. Because obviously you couldn't actually say that they lied, and we cannot even prove that they lied, for example. It is possible that people change their position, obviously, when it comes to polling. Now, evidence suggests that, in elections, drawing to the period or the D-Day, people change positions. In fact, immediately after elections, when people are disappointed, they would say that they won't vote. When government comes to power, after the honeymoon, then of course, a year after, 2 years after, and things are bad, voters would say that they won't vote. So it's evidence that they do that. Now, drawing to election period, now there are quite a number of social issues that make people go back to the polls. One, sometimes they want to prevent somebody they don't want to win, and so they will go to the polls. Sometimes they will see that their situations have deteriorated badly, and as a result, they will go to the polls. Sometimes they have some kind of expectation as a result of interaction with politicians. As a result, they will go back to the polls. So yes, before elections, especially far away from the election day, people would think that they don't want to vote. Drawing to the election period, they would then go to the polls because campaigns themselves have effect. When we start campaigning and people start listening to argument here and there, the intensity of the campaign, the razzmatazz around the campaign, they actually draw voters to the polls.
Okay.
And so there are so many reasons why voters may change their position, although they might have said that they will vote in a particular way, but they will change their position. As Musa actually said earlier, at a time when perhaps Charles was campaigning, he might have drawn people to his side. When they had seen the national players, i.e., the Central Party, descend onto the constituency, when they had seen perhaps some kind of gimmicks that they might have read into it, they would then change their position. So many other reasons why you might do a poll. The results show something. But then, of course, getting to the actual vote, they would actually take a position. There is also a contextual issue, as Musa actually talked about. Polls, as we know, are quantitative issues, quantitative measures. The qualitative bit, the insight, the feeling, or what we call the emotions of the people, polls don't capture. So usually when we do the quantitative bit with the numbers, we try to have some kind of a feel, in terms of the temperature of the people, and then we superimpose it or we juxtapose it on the numbers and ask ourselves whether the numbers are actually true reflection. Again, as you ask the question, what about the questioning? I see polls just like corruption. You don't ask people whether they're corrupt, and they will tell you yes, they are. Usually, they would have to make projections. So the questioning is another issue. You always have to subject your polling questions to some kind of grilling, some kind of evaluation to see whether it would elicit the responses. So most of the time, we would ask the one question in so many other ways that you think would, sort of mask exactly what you want from the voter, so that even if they want to deceive you or they intend to deceive you, you would still be able to get some kind of insight with other kind of questions. So again, and I'm sure he might have done that, but of course circumstances, as we said, the dynamics of the period earlier on and then closer to the elections would make someone change their thinking. Don't forget the closeness of the poll, which is the 1% lead, actually reflects the previous, elections that actually happened in Assin North. It was a close race, especially between the MPP and NDC, of course, in terms of parliamentary. And so the poll having a 1% lead was not that bad because it reflects how, competitive that particular, political market has been. But obviously, when the actual numbers came out, the difference was massive. But of course, it tells you the contextual issues. The idea that most Ghanaians are not satisfied with the government certainly actually shown through.
But you see, Professor Kobi-Mensah, when we look at the polls in the US, for instance, in the build-up to the elections, yes, they would use the college system. But when we look at the polls, for instance, in every state, you would see in states that they're telling you, okay, so Hillary Clinton has at the time with Donald Trump, for instance, has a 1.5% lead, but you have about 3 or 4% undecided. Going into the election, then you get told again that Hillary Clinton's point is reduced to, say, 1% lead with about 3% undecided, but may lean towards Donald Trump or lean towards Hillary Clinton. When the results come out, you actually would see, based on all the projections, everything panning out exactly as they predicted. Okay, so for instance, everybody knew that Hillary Clinton was going to win the popular vote, but when it got to winning the college system, they said it was going to be difficult for her. Why is ours so difficult that today we're here discussing how a 1.1% on the 25th, that was the last time you conducted your research, right, Musa, because you indicated on the 25th of June. Yes. So 25th of June was Saturday, right? No, it was actually Sunday.
Yes. No, it was Sunday.
Yes, Sunday. So from Sunday to Tuesday, you actually have that 1% leading to a deficit of some 15%. How's that possible, Professor Kobi-Mensah? Before I get to Musa.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, number of things can account. Don't forget that polling is quite new in our system, even just as our democratic practices. And so there are quite a number of structures, electoral structures that are coming along over the years. The idea that our democratic system is new and there are some kind of structures that are actually coming along, we have to take that into consideration. So if you look at the technicalities in terms of our polling, obviously Uncle Ben had been doing over the period. Obviously we had come on, Musa had done. In fact, before Musa, we had started IPO. And you realize that these are kind of structures that are associated with a political system that are emerging. And so it will take time to refine them. As we go along, we're learning quite a number of things. I'm sure Musa himself will admit that perhaps it had actually taught him some few things that he needs here and there. So we might actually look at it and say, in comparison with the developed, democracies, we're falling short. But actually, we're not falling short. In fact, the 1% margin that he actually said was not exactly as a lead. In fact, if you listen to or if you read the text that they put out, they made some kind of allowances that suggested that although the 1% lead did not actually equate to the NPP person winning. But of course, maybe that explanation didn't come out well. Of course, I'm not here to hold breath, for Musa, for example. But I think that explanation couldn't come out well. Let me tackle the 6%, undecided. Now, I think they could have done that in context. They could actually put that in context, as you said. Now, what I have experienced is that majority of times, people who are in somehow opposition to what we call the establishment, most of the time they hold back their views because they see their views as unpopular or in minority. And most of the time, when people are in minority, the experiences are that they are afraid of reprisals, and they're not sure who is asking that questions, whether those people are coming from a position of strength. So they're most of the time likely to evade you in terms of giving you a realistic kind of a response. I'm not saying they're lying, but they hold back on their true sentiments of how they're going to vote, you know. And so in most of the times or most of the cases, you see that undecided are quite a number of people who are actually on the side of the opposition. It is very difficult to read through that because obviously you can't tell whether indeed they are or not. But the voter behavior over the years, in terms of voter behavior studies that we've done, suggest that majority of people, when they are in the opposing side of the majority or of the establishment, they hold back their views and may not be able to tell you. Now, if you have those insights, you probably could juxtapose that on the the polling numbers and then make those inferences, although you cannot be assertive about that. But of course, I think that is the area that evaded Musa and his team, and I'm sure they probably might have learned from that one for future polls, for example.
Great. So let me get back to you, Musa. And I'm interested in one thing. So you said you spoke to these persons. You spoke to 2,500 people, over the period. Now, you say you did a random sampling. I'm just interested in one thing. And you said some of it were face-to-face. So the people that you spoke to face-to-face, did you do all of it face-to-face, or some of them that you had to do online? All of it was face-to-face?
All face-to-face.
Now, the people that you met, what percentage of people said they were NPP? What percentage said they were NDC? What percentage said they were floating voters?
Give me 1 minute. Let me just go to the document. But I think NPP, just bear with me.
The NPP is?
I'm just coming. Okay. Party affiliation. NPP, 35%.
Okay.
NDC, 42%.
Okay.
Floating voters, 13%.
Okay.
Other parties, 4%. And not disclosed, 5%.
Okay. So if NDC was 42%, right? And MPP 35%. And yet at the time you were collating these, you were doing the analysis, you found Charles Opoku ahead of the NDC candidate. Is it not surprising then that at the end of it, Charles Opoku reduces so much that he performs woefully in the election?
No, it's not surprising. You don't assume that because someone is MPP, he will vote MPP. Because someone is NDC, he will vote NDC. They cross carpet. And what happened is that if you have a candidate that is liked by floating voters, he then sometimes tends to get his support from the floating voters. So the fact that I'm MPP doesn't make me a voter for MPP for the next election. You could see the MPP candidates, voters who are voting for Charles, and then see those who are NDC voting for NDC voting for Charles, MPP voting for Etikwesin. And then you see the split among the other parties or undisclosed and floating voters going in different directions.
Now, Professor Kodmensa has made a point. He's talked about putting this in context and looking at other characteristics. I look at your conclusion, even though you indicate that this is going to be, you indicate, for instance, that Charles Opoku has been declining in votes over the period. We'll come back to the point you made that once the national executives got in there, it started affecting his votes. Or the National Party got in. But once you indicated that he had been declining in votes over the period, did that not actually show you that by the end of it all, and bearing in mind that the NPP National Party was doing a lot over the last 2 days, that could actually sway the elections in his favor, in the favor of James Quayson?
Is it for me or for Prof?
It's for you, Musa Dankwa.
All right. You are assuming that what they were doing was yielding a positive result. That's what you assume. So that would mean that then that should result to earning vote. But what they were doing was rather drawing votes away from Charles.
Exactly. That's what. The question I ask is that shouldn't that have told you in your conclusion that because of these things, it was likely to have James Quayson win the election?
No, that is, if you read my report, my conclusion, I said that even though Charles was leading, I expect James Detiquesin to win because of the factors that we've gathered in the field and the trajectory of the race and the curve that we've seen. So we didn't say Charles was going to win. We said he was leading. But my conclusion was that.
I mean, I'm going to read your conclusion because you've brought that in. So you say, in conclusion, the race is too close to call. However, with evidence that the NDC is likely to outperform the poll numbers, coupled with the possibility that some of the voters have been uncandid with pollsters, it is likely James Detiquesin could win the race by a whisker. Again.
Yes, so the result was that he won. The question is the whisker.
Yes, that's the point I was getting to.
Because the lead was within the post margin of error of 1.9.
Sure.
So we couldn't confidently hit your chest and say that this will be the result because the margin of error was 1.9 and the guy led by 1.4. And we couldn't scientifically allocate those who were undecided. So I have to err on the part of caution. It's in order to get it right, to the outcome.
So,
so that's the position we took.
Let's look at one point that you've made, and I'll bring Professor Kobe-Mensah in shortly. You have said that Charles Opoku was doing well until his party came in. Tell me more about that. How do you come by that conclusion?
You see, we have been there for about 4 weeks. So there was a poll we took on the 6th June.
Okay.
And then 11th June. And then 18th June. And then 25th June. So we saw when the first poll was done before he became the candidate.
Okay.
At that time, he was engaging the community. He was going around. They were physically touching him. He was engaging them. So he was leading 38%. And then when he won, then the party machinery kind of took over. And in the first week of his winning, he dropped 4%. Because there was no engagement with the people. He was far from the people like he used to. Unlike James Detiquesin, he was there with the people and in the community, greeting them, touching them, and talking to them. I have never seen or heard Charles speaking on the platform since the national campaign took over. The people couldn't hear him.
Before you continue, prior to the national campaign taking over, was he speaking to these delegates and addressing them, these electorates and addressing them?
Yes. We were there. We saw him. Okay. And if you listen to what they were saying about him, it was positive. And in fact, we ran a scenario between him and Detiquesin, and then Freeman and Detiquesin. Against Freeman, Detiquesin was winning landslide. If Freeman had won the election, Detiquesin could have gone to sleep. So we saw the two candidates before the primaries, and we realized that Charles Mensah or Charles Opoku was the better candidate against Detiquesin than Freeman. That is why the party ensured that he won the primaries.
When you say the party ensured, they went into an election and he won. But do you know something we don't know?
No,
I am asking you a question. I don't know. I mean, when you say the party ensured, what did the party do?
Look. We were in the field. We engaged the people who were delegates, and they were telling us that, look, almost say we're in a gentleman to know or on with me. So see, the delegates didn't know the poll numbers. Maybe MPD had done some polling that delegates didn't know. So they were trying to look, this is where we should go because this is the best guy for us. And this is the polling number. And they went that way.
I see.
And I don't think they were wrong.
Okay. So let's get to the party's work before I bring Professor Mensah in. So what did the party do wrong that actually impacted negatively Charles Opoku's chances?
One, the money. The show of money in the constituency. How money was really used in the constituency was, different level.
Okay.
And for some people, they felt that we are in economic hardship. We know this country was broke. They didn't know there is such a money available in the country that can be dished like that. So for some people, it was really appalling. It was very putting off. And that was a big issue in the campaign. Then you also have the roads that were being done overnight, day and night. And they were saying that, so you could do this and you have let this follow all this while until by election. Excuse me. So all these things really contributed in making Charles a bit of I don't know. They
So-
weaken him.
So is it your conclusion that but for the national campaign, Charles Opoku would have won this election?
Most likely.
Professor Kobi-Mensah, what's your thought on this?
Well, first of all, I think that Musa, when the demographics have actually shown that the NPP respondent, the respondent that actually indicated affiliation to NPP was more than the NDC.
No, the NDC was more than the NPP.
NDC was more.
Oh, the NDC was more than the NDC. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Now let me come to but I suppose that you probably might have controlled for some of the demographies. Sometimes you look at it and you control for, especially on the side of the what do you call it? The side in comparison with if you had actually looked at the undecided and which of the polling areas those undecided were found, whether it's the NPP or NDC strongholds, if you control for that, perhaps you could actually make up for why the marginal lead, for example. But let me come to the idea that Charles Opoku would have won if the national team hadn't gone there. I actually disagree on that one. The reason being that, you see, the Assin North is part of Ghana. And as you rightly said, the people were surprised that a country that is suffering that much could experience overnight some money here and there, some development here and there. So certainly they are feeling the pinch of the national issue, which all of us are talking about. So on the national scale, almost every Ghanaian, if you have to give them vote now, are most likely to vote against the incumbents. That's one. Now, secondly, when it comes to local politics, which parliamentary election is about local politics, I am not sure that we have seen an outcry of the electorate about Kwesi's performance, like as we have seen with other constituencies. In fact, even now that we had the entire media attention on them, we would have seen some footages demonstrating their unhappiness with their incumbent MP. And then I am sure, given the character of most, or not most, but given the character of Ghanaian constituencies, some people would even do tapes or videos expressing their satisfaction that he's been even taken to court because he had been a very terrible MP. We would have seen that. Now, we haven't seen such footages coming from that constituency about their displeasure with that particular MP. So it was difficult for me to logically position that someone who is not a politician, who is just a philanthropist, overnight can come and unseat somebody that the constituents have not demonstrated hugely against, who is a politician, and had won an election barely 4 years ago, in fact, 3 years ago, and he's been serving the constituency until now that they asked him to actually step aside. It is somehow illogical to think Charles Opoku would win because of these instances I'm talking about. National plus local politics, none of them was actually in the position or to the benefit of the majority party, and then by extension, for Charles Opoku, I didn't think that he would win. Even if the National Party hadn't gone to Assin, I think that still Kwesi would have won the election.
But Professor Mensah, look at it from this point also. So here you are with a man who's also liked by his people. Yes, there's the whole situation of Kwesi being quote unquote persecuted by the government. That's how the people saw it at a point in time. Now, if this person, Musa, is telling us that at the beginning of polling on the 6th of June, he was leading by some 19%. Now, by the time the NPP got in there and started doing what they are used to in by-elections, the people became angry. Can't you reasonably infer that but for what they did, this man who's loved by many could have just sailed through, and that his loss is anger towards the political system and his party, the NPP?
No, I don't think so. You see, let's contextualize this. Let's look at the position. Take away the national influence, all right? And let's look at the two individuals. Don't forget, Kwesi was also liked, all right? And that's the point I made, that there was no evidence that they didn't like him. So Kwesi was also liked. Perhaps this new guy was also liked. Now, let's assume that this new guy came in as a fresh face. We all know when something new comes on, people troop, to that particular individual. Fresh person, he's actually campaigning. Perhaps they say he's doing philanthropy. Now, let's ask ourselves, what are the reasons why perhaps he was liked when he was thrown into the race? Obviously, he's come up doing some philanthropy work. But the issue is that as we gear towards the closer we get towards the elections, as I said, people would now start to find, or there would be some kind of equilibrium, because he's been thrown in as a new person. People will start engaging him. They start to get to know him. As we go along, even if the National Party hadn't gone there, I am sure that his lead would have been cut down, as we saw, because the point is that unless, and I made that point this morning, unless you're buying from a company that does not satisfy you, it is difficult for you to swing or to change where you buy something else, or when you buy something, unless that the new competitor or the new person who is coming in is giving it a much more compelling offer. If the person is not giving it a much more compelling offer, there's no way you're going to change where you buy your watch from, because that person hadn't actually changed their ways of delivering. They haven't shown any lackadaisical attitude towards you. It will be very difficult for you to go and test a new product that you don't know than sticking to a product that you are satisfied with. In marketing, that logic doesn't play. And that's why if you're a new entrant to a market, you must have a much more compelling offer. In addition to all your advertising that you will do, you have to demonstrate to the customer, you have to promise the customer that you can give that person a much more compelling offer before they move from their existing supplier to a new supplier. In this case, I haven't seen anything compelling from Charles Opoku, for example, which Musa himself actually said that. So for me, I think that even if the National Party hadn't gone to Assin, we would still see a certain downward slope of his lead. And I'm sure that Kwesi would have won, ultimately.
Okay. When we return after these messages, we'll be asking Musa about, at the time he said that people liked, Opoku, what were the reasons why they liked him? We'll find that out from Musa Dankwa, who's the head of global research, global info analytics. And we also have Professor Kobi Mensah, who is a political marketing expert, joining us. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back from that short break, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. My name is Winston Amoah, and this evening we're having a conversation about polling, particularly in the Assin North constituency. The polls had indicated it was going to go in a particular year, but most importantly said it was going to be a close contest. But that didn't really happen, and we're interrogating that. This evening we're joined by Professor Kobi Mensah. Himself, they've been with iPoll. He's also a political marketing expert. Musa Dankwa is head of global research for global info analytics. So before we went for the break, we're having a conversation about what may have happened if the NPP national party or national campaign didn't go to, Assin North. Musa, you had been telling us that when Charles Opoku was doing his own campaign, he was doing well. What were the reasons that people told you they liked him? That was a question I said I was going to ask you before we went for the break.
All right, thank you very much. In fact, we asked them to pick, to give us some of the reasons why they will vote for a candidate or vote for a candidate in this upcoming election. And one of the reasons were government performance and trains and equip people, people's man. He secures job for the people, attends social events, contributes generously in the community. He listens to the people, provides help to the needy. Now, let's take the first one, government performance. Okay. Those who said government performance was important for them, Charles had 51% of voters who were saying government performance voting for him, compared to 46% for the equation. When you come to trains and equip people, James 40%, Charles 53, people's man, James 42, Charles 43. He secures job for people, Charles 64, James 30, attend social event, James 39, Charles 55, contributes generously in the community, James 49, Charles 53. So you could see that on all those issues, he was outperforming the equation. That was the beginning of the poll. This is the second poll we conducted. Okay. So he gave us his strength. So you could see where Charles was very strong at and where he is weak at. So we saw this much earlier in the race. Then we realized that it is because of his person that these guys are really touting for him. But probably, you know, as polls go on, people then begin to rationalize and see what is bringing on board and whether those things that they've mentioned are really important now, looking at what is at stake. So they may be able to shift position. We didn't carry on with this questionnaire over the period. We would have really seen what the changes were. With hindsight, I think we should have.
And I see Professor Kobe Mensah nodding because maybe he probably agrees that.
Absolutely. So the point I was making that, you see, those activities or those attributes that the people actually, assigned, what you call percentages to. Now, if you drill down, you would realize that perhaps these were party lines, all right, because those who actually identified as MPP and those who identified as NDC are likely to, be identified with some of these attributes. Then the interesting thing is those who are actually undecided or those who are actually independent, what were their percentage allocation to these people? Because it would be very difficult to actually agree, especially when it comes to government performance. For such a constituency, you don't even have to do a poll. Just cast your eye across the constituency and ask yourself, what is the government performance in that particular constituency? Let's actually expand the argument and talk about perhaps they reflecting government performance nationally, i.e., maybe the economic indicators. Let's talk about discipline in terms of corruption, good governance, etc. Even if that is a reflection of those voters, in terms of national performance, I am very sure that when you drill down, there may be specific MPP activists or followers who probably would say that the government is actually doing well. Whereas, those who would consider as independent or NDC would actually take a different, position, which means that naturally, in terms of their choices, they're going to actually just position themselves along these two. But crucially, those who call themselves independent will be crucial in that determination. So when you drill down the poll, you realize that there is that kind of division in terms of who is saying Charles was better doing ABCD, who is saying Charles JCPC was better doing ABCD. That's somewhere the detail that would need to actually arrive at that conclusion, whether JCPC would have won anyway or Charles would have won.
Yeah, but so Musa, you've told us, how the 25th, polling was done, polls were done. This time also, what was the percentage NPP and percentage NDC? Did you do that?
In the one that I've just given you, let me just get that quickly for you.
Yes, let's get it so we can do the analysis with it. Yes.
Okay, in that report, 38% were MPP, 34 were NDC, and 16 were floating voters.
Okay.
And other parties, 5%, not disclosed 8%, roughly, yes.
So, Professor Mensah, 38 for NPP, 34 for NDC, 16 floating voters, 8% say they are not going to disclose. But if you look at these numbers and coupled with the outcomes that he had, doesn't that still give you an indication that maybe Jachikwesin could have won, but the NPP campaign affected Charles Opoku?
No, I have no doubt that the NPP campaign actually affected, Charles Opoku. I have always said that the speed dating that politicians are doing, and when I say speed dating, I mean that they wait until a certain election before they bring the goodies, and it annoys people. In fact, NDC did that in 2016, and that's the reason why they lost. Obviously, Dumsor was solved before the election, but there was a whisker just before the election, before Dumsor was solved. Obviously, they started in my own Adenta area. I saw with my fili kolo eyes, right? Building roads, midnight, and I was so surprised. When you do that, those speed dating thing, it annoys people, and they will vote against you because they think that you have woodwinked them and you're actually doing things when they had already lost so much as a result of underdevelopment. So certainly what the government did would turn off people. But the point I'm making is that we have seen in this country evidences of constituents angry at their MPs. And we haven't seen that one from Assin North. So it makes it difficult to say that they would reject somebody they just elected barely 2-3 years ago. All right?
Somebody would argue that he was never given a chance to perform. So how do you get angry with a man who's always been in court?
Now, Winston,
before the court.
Well, I mean,
people,
by the 6th of January, there was an injunction. Even in Parliament during the election of Speaker, they tried preventing him from taking part in the vote. So there's a man that has been in court right after the elections. Yes, but Musa, you want to make a point?
Yes, what I want to say is that some of the constituents were worried that if they vote for Jachikwesin, his legal issues will complicate matters for them, and that could affect their constituency's development.
Yeah, but that was not the satisfaction with his performance.
No. It's because of the way it was because of the way the judiciary or the government was seen to be pushing him in the legal route. So people were just fearful, not that he's not performing. They feared that they may send him to jail. And for that matter, they fear that, if that's the case, then let's take the same fate and vote for somebody.
You see, Musa, that is a very important statement. And that narrative was cancelled out by the NDC. Yeah. Because obviously the NDC was also campaigning. And
they responded.
Once they had responded to that narrative, and that narrative had cancelled out, what remains constant is whether the guy was performing or not performing, because that is the constant one. So that's the point I'm making. If the guy was not performing, and NDC had even gone ahead to cancel the narrative that he would go to jail, he would have lost. Because in the first place, they are dissatisfied with him anyway. But the court case is actually an outlier in the decision of the voter going to vote. Voter behavior would not ordinarily come with a certain thinking that somebody, if I vote for him, is going to jail or not. By the way, people have gone to jail and had won elections. Our first president was in jail. He won elections. So if you look at the voter behavior, intention to vote, going to jail or not is not the most important in person's decision, because it is even something that is an outlier. What is constant is whether that MP was performing or not. And I think that is the most basic decision that the voters would actually look at in terms of voter. That's why I still think that he would have won anyway.
Finally, Musa, so there are those who said, you got it wrong. You didn't do a good work at all. How do you
I
respond?
don't think so.
Finally, I'm giving you a chance to talk to those who say you did a poor job on your poll.
Those who understand statistics and polling know that we didn't do a bad job. Because they look at the numbers, they look at the variation and how far we were from the actual numbers. Per our calculation, we were about 3% off from the equation and 2.6 off from Charles. We know that we could only improve. And polling elsewhere is being improved every day. And there are things that we could have done better. Yes, we'll learn that lesson from there and move forward. But we're not going to be discouraged because somebody said we were wrong. Even the big pollers, the Gallup poll, you got it wrong sometimes. YouGov, they got it wrong. We are just learning. We will make mistakes, but that will not deter us.
Professor Kobi-Mensah, you do polls also, and you said, no, they didn't get it wrong at all. Of course, his conclusion was that, Judge Equation could still win it. So this is not one that actually deviated from what happened.
Absolutely, Winston. I think that I agree with Musa. I didn't think that they had it wrong in terms of what they did. The results came out differently. Not what they did, but the result of the practice. I mean, obviously they can't control people's behavior. All right. So there's extent that you can go. Of course, you would say that they got it wrong. If you interrogate them and you find the things that they did, you find a lot of anomalies, that you would say that they got it wrong. But I don't think that there were so many anomalies in what they did. They had actually procedurally done things right, only that the behavior of the voter is what they can control. Okay. So for me, as he said, there's room for improvement. All of us are in this game trying to improve better and then make sure that we can give Ghanaians the kind of expectations that they want. So for me, I think that Musa's team should not be discouraged. They're on the right path. Only that they have to be mindful of the pitfalls, and then try to improve on the things that they are doing. I mean, we have similar engines. We've been doing similar stuff, and daily we're learning on some of these things, like the questioning style, understanding the behavior of the voters very much, because the Ghanaian behavior, Ghanaian voter is very, very complex. The Ghanaian voter is very complex. And so I think that it would take time for us to sort of understand them better, have a lot more insight, and then we can serve Ghanaians better. So kudos. I think you have to do, more to improve. And I'm sure all of us would actually, as time goes on, with our analysis.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Kobi-Mensah, for making time to join us this evening. And thank you also, Musa Danko. I had to pull you away from your Twitter spaces. Thank you very much for making time to join us. Musa Danko, who is head of global research of the Global Info Analytics, and Professor Kobi-Mensah, who is Associate Professor of Marketing, Political Marketing at the University of Ghana Business School. My name is Winston Amoah. Thank you very much. Coming up next is Joy News Prime. Keep watching the Joy News channel. Have a lovely evening.